Henry has volunteered to do some kind of live interpretation. So if you would like, and you'll need to interpret this, if you'd like to have live interpretation, please sit over on this side so that we can kind of get the best setup of that.
Sí, hay gente que quieren una traducción en español. Por favor, toma un asiento aquí en ese lado del espacio.
Okay, hi everybody. We're at the, a subsidiary of the LA Property Department is the Skid Row one of its world galactic holdings is the Skid Row Archives. And
a round of applause for John.
So anyway, we're really happy to have Boston and all the panelists, and the exhibition continues to build itself. Before, LA Property Department, the performing group, is making a performance connected to this. And then before each panel, we've been doing like a few minutes of something. And we're going to do two 3-minute performances. That's right, it's a double feature. But also, tonight the panel is going to be about tenant governance and tenant ownership. And I was telling Justin, as one of the panelists is going to talk about ownership. We sent out an email about the event, and a friend of ours in Vancouver, who is a housing activist in the downtown east side, which is a neighborhood very similar to Skid Row, both because mainly because there's a lot of activism among the residents of the low-income neighborhood. And she wrote back saying, "Great, we just bought our first hotel." So,
oh my God,
we're going to have to catch up more later, but we're going to hear about how to do it. We're going to hear some about it tonight, and then we're going to catch up with her later.
My name is Rossi Wu. I've been working with LAPD on an exhibition in development that is soon to open. Thank you. Very affirming crowd. The genesis of this exhibit was LAPD has been operating in Skid Row for more than 40 years. Long enough to have built a kind of incredible archive that didn't start out as being an archive, it started out being contemporary life, and as it's kind of accumulated it sort of become history. And part of that is a lot of footage about the formation of Skid Row Housing Corporation and the creation of SROs as we sort of knew them until very recently. And that was a really interesting archive to work with, and there's an idea of how do we present that today? What does that have to say about the crisis that's facing all these residential hotels now? So we've been working to kind of produce that and kind of come up with an analysis and think about it together in this space. This is a timeline that can give some background about it. There's some demands, or I guess a to-do list on this wall that came out of our last event. We've basically been doing kind of events that allow us to kind of learn together. The first one was about looking at the past, the formation of those SROs. The second one was about the demise of Skid Row Housing Trust and sort of issues plaguing SROs in general downtown. Our third event was about what to do going forward, and this event is kind of like a bonus event that came out of the enthusiasm from our last event. One of the items, number 9 on this list of 18, is tenants should own their own housing. And that got a lot of interest. People were really excited about that idea, and there were folks who wanted to talk about their thoughts of how that might be able to happen. How can tenants own their housing? How can tenants manage their housing? Any ideas for how tenants, especially tenants in SROs and Skid Row, but tenants everywhere, could have more agency about the conditions that they live in. So tonight we have 4 folks who have offered to come and share their thoughts of what that might look like from their own perspective. So I'm going to welcome those panelists up to the stage. So if you've been to these before, you know that my moderation style is minimal. And I just try to kind of keep things together and keep things on time. And I try to just ask some very, very big but very basic questions of each of these folks. So we're just going to go, I think, in the order from your right, from right to left. So we have Amanda Spiva. Is that right, Spiva? Spiva. Amanda Spiva from the LA Tenants Union. I should also mention LA Tenants Union meets in this space every Wednesday. So, and a lot of times that conversation is about sort of nuts and bolts, things that tenants need in the moment. So if you came here hoping to get that, Please connect with some of the LA Tenants Union folks who are in this room after this panel. And I'm sorry that this was maybe a surprise. So Amanda Spiva is going to go first and talk about proposals and ideas for how tenants could own their own homes. Next we have Jonathan Harris. Jonathan Hunter from Venice Community Housing, talking about some experiments in tenant management that they're doing over there. Next we have Justin Szlaza.
You got it.
Okay,
Yeah, you got it.
all right. And he's going to talk about proposals for how tenants in Skid Row could own their own housing. And next we have Jessica Scanlin. Jenny. Scanlin. Do I even know this? Jennifer Scanlin, who's going to talk about her experience with the CRA and HACLA, and ideas, I guess, both about how tenants in HACLA can have agency over the definitions of their housing, as well as some ideas that people have had of how HACLA could take over some of the SROs that we have here downtown and what that might look like. So they're each going to answer 3 questions for under 5 minutes each. Then we'll have it open up to general questions. And where we really like this to go is for it to be a generative place for us all to have ideas and figure out where we want to go next. I really think of this space as a place for developing our own analysis and our own organizing. So, while these folks are here to share their perspectives, that's sort of not the point, is that it's not just a one-way communication. I hope it opens up into a general conversation amongst ourselves about what we want to do next. So with that, I'm just gonna ask this first question. And lastly, if you've been here before, you know that there is a lot of energy usually in the room, people like wanting to have their question right away. We will get to all the questions, but we're gonna do these 3 questions for each of the panelists first, and then open it up into larger questions. So just try to save your question for the end if you can. Okay, so this first one is just, if you could tell us why you came to care about this issue at all, kind of a little bit about yourself and why it matters to you. And second, what's your idea for how people might own or manage their housing? What would that look like? What's the dream?
My name is Amanda Spiva. Housing insecurity can happen to anyone, and I'm living proof of that. So are many of you. So good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm a native Angelino, raised in Toluca Lake, and for the past 10 years I've lived the reality of SRO housing as a Section 8 tenant. After building a career with the Department of Fish and Game and an injury on the job that left me permanently disabled with seizures, and exhausting my savings from the sale of my home, I found myself living in an SRO. And that experience changed my understanding of what housing insecurity truly means and what dignity in housing should look like. Over the last decade, I've lived through what happens when systems operate without accountability, broken security, unsafe access, fires, flooding, failed maintenance, locked fire doors, broken elevators, and residents left without answers in emergencies. I've also seen the strength, resilience, and dignity of the people that call these buildings home. These are not isolated incidents. They're a result of a system without accountability. And I'm here today not only as a resident, but as a tenant advocate and a volunteer in street outreach, animal welfare, and tenant organizing. And I just like to say one thing clearly. No decisions about residents should ever be made without the residents. Dr. Somebody, the people who live in these buildings are the true experts on what safety, habitability, and dignity require. And while tenant-led governance with real authority, ethics, oversight, and meaningful accountability is not just possible, it's necessary. And that's why tenant governance must include independent ethics and oversight, resident-led. We're not asking for power without accountability. We're asking for safety, dignity, and a system that finds the answers to the people who live here. The people who live with the consequence must also have the power to shape the solutions.
Yeah.
Well, now I have to follow that. Good evening, everybody.
Jonathan Hunter. I am a community design and engagement manager with Venice Community Housing, right in the middle of Venice. We are expanding well beyond that area, but specifically my why. My why comes from knowing what it feels like to be discarded. My why comes from knowing what it feels like to not be considered. My why comes from knowing what it feels like to be thrown away. I don't want to see that happen to anyone else. And if I can do something, and if I can work with an organization, if I can work with a group of people to make that, make a bit of a difference there, then that's what I want to do. That's my why. When I am driving or walking down the street and I see someone in need, and I see someone that doesn't have whatever it may be, and it still breaks my heart, then there is a why. We live in a county, we live in a city, we live in neighborhoods, we live in communities where there are a bunch of whys. And as a community engagement manager, my job is to bring people together. My job is to bring awareness, to bring understanding, to bring clarification in areas to help people understand what it is that needs to be done to make that change. So as long as there is a why, then we got work to do, right?
Thank you. My name is Justin Szlaza. I wear a number of different hats right now. I'm Director of Homeless Initiatives for a small nonprofit based here in downtown LA. I also sit on the LASHA Commission, so that's all my fault. But I was appointed by Supervisor Barger, and I know there's a lot of room for improvement in our system, and that's a lot of room for improvement. And my why is kind of similar, Jonathan, to yours. I just can't live in the city with the situation that we have now, and I can't not do something about it. And the work that I've done, my career started in the private sector. I've done a lot of different things, but for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing volunteer outreach work to my unhoused neighbors along the LA River as part of HACLA, which is an organization that operates in the neighborhood where I live in. But I've gotten more and more involved, starting with talking to people who are living on the street who are unhoused, talking to people who do outreach to those people, which is, by the way, the hardest job in Los Angeles. And then I've met kind of every level of the system, and now I sit at the LASHA Commission, so I have good oversight across the board. But ultimately, my why is I need a place constructive to put my rage about what's going on in LA. But I want to get to the question, I think for decades, low-income renters in places like Skid Row have had very little opportunity to build wealth, stability, or take control over the housing where they live. And I think most affordable housing models focus on keeping people housed, which is essential, but they don't provide pathways generally to ownership. And one model that I think is worth examining here, and I don't have all the answers, but I want to start the conversation, is what's happened in New York City, where there were many buildings in the 70s and the 80s that converted from rental apartments into co-op apartments, cooperatives. And now, where this mostly benefited middle class tenants, that structure can be adapted to create ownership opportunities for lower income residents, I believe. And I think that there are ways that we can do this that here in LA and adapt kind of the situation that we have. And I want to get into it more, but I don't want to go into every bit of it right now because I know there's 2 other questions coming up. But anyway, that's kind of New York. I see as kind of the model that can be adapted here, but specifically to our neighborhood. So I'll leave it at that.
Good evening. Speaking to the mic. I'm Jenny Scanlin. I am Chief Development Officer with the Housing Authority for the City of Los Angeles. And I think, my why, I started working in LA in 2004. But my entire career has been spent focused on, I think, a lot of the same concerns and issues we all have, which is about equity and fairness and trying to create an even playing field in this world that we live in, and recognizing that it's not fair for some communities to have more resources than others, and trying to find a path in my life and the work that I get to do to try to influence that, to try to make a difference, to bring more resources into communities that don't have them, to try to house people who are unhoused, to try to help other people's dreams get realized. And so I think that has what compelled me. I think in every job I've taken, in every piece of work that I do, I come at this from someone who sits as I'm mostly working in government to do that. We all have different paths and different places where we think we can make a difference. I felt that, I think a lot of us sit here today, we don't have a lot of faith in government. I think we have a lot of concerns about government. We don't have a lot of trust in government, and I felt that even though it might be easier, and I have worked in nonprofits, to potentially work outside of government, I felt it was important to have someone in government trying to do good, trying to break a cycle, trying to reach across the aisle so that trust can restore itself. Because I think that, we're all here, and I think our institutions are here, and we're built to serve. And so I try to take that into my life and my heart every day. And how do I serve? I consider myself a public servant, and that's what I do. I started in the Community Redevelopment Agency, which is up here on the board somewhere. But I started there, over here, a little bit further over here. Yes, and unfortunately, I think in the days when I think we were doing some really good work, and I got to work with Legal Aid, and I got to work with LA Can, I got to work here in downtown. I got to work with them to put a moratorium on demolishing SRO hotels. And that was really important work, and thank God it still sticks today. And one of the projects that brought us all together is over there on that wall, the Rosalind. I was at the CRA when the owner, there was trying to develop it into market rate housing, and everybody stepped in and said, stop what you're doing, and let's turn this into affordable housing. And so, I got to see the beginning of something good happen with that project. It's interesting that everything kind of comes full circle sometimes in life. I sit at the Housing Authority now trying to work on a plan to maybe take that property back. And I don't know if that is something we'll be able to do, but I've spent the past few months, and part of last year, trying to figure out how do we keep this affordable? How do we ensure that this doesn't get foreclosed on? How do we ensure that you have good ownership and tenants have a say in being able to stay in their homes and stay in that building and not be concerned. So anyway, so that's my why. I don't know if I have expertise at all in how to turn rental housing into ownership housing necessarily. I'm excited actually to hear what my fellow panelists have to say about that, but I do have experience in working to try to create resident leadership and trying to provide the types of platforms and process that allows residents to give input to government and tell us what we're doing right, what we can do better, and at least have conversations and look at new pathways. So I'm excited to learn, and excited to take from the table on this experience, hopefully some ideas back with me to see what we can do within the housing authority to maybe help, develop some of those concepts and see what we can do to push things forward.
I'm back. Sorry, I had to go get a chair. So we kind of bled from the why question into a little bit of the what, and I want to kind of focus now. Maybe we're going to lead the second two questions together. So if you could sort of talk in specifics of like, what is your vision of like? I know there's some differences of sort of whether it's tenant management, whether it's tenant ownership. What does that really look like? And I guess the other piece is sort of like, obviously some of these feel like really, really big lifts, right? To go from SROs where the conditions are already really terrible, they already seem like they're falling apart, to now tenants own them. They have, like equity in them. They're figuring out ways to kind of raise money to run them. What does that look like? What are the first steps to get there? So that's the sort of the next bit is sort of what is the vision you have? And for folks who are enacting it in different forms, like certain things you've already done, we'd love to know the nuts and bolts of like what does the experience you've done with tenant management look like? What does tenant leadership look like in HACLA now?
Well, if we just go to question number one, which I hope I didn't. Yeah. Question number one. So how do you see it envision SRO tenant ownership or management working? So I can only speak as a resident and as a tenant person, but I think I'm qualified in some ways to know what the residents need. So I see it as a resident-led management with real authority and not just symbolic input. The people who live in the building know exactly what the building needs around safety, maintenance, and quality of life, because this is our home. I would want to see a board of resident trustees that works alongside resident-led management, plus an ethics and oversight committee made up of residents from the building. Because nobody cares about private place, safety, and protecting the building from vandalism more than the people who live there every day. I think that's, I'll turn it over to you.
Sweet. Excuse me. Hi, everybody again. So my vision is world peace. All is world peace, just straight across the board. No, but seriously, like within the communities, definitely peace is necessary. But ultimately, what we want, what my vision would be is full understanding of how operations, what it looks like. Tenants and residents understanding what it takes to actually own the property. That takes a series of educational series, to really understand the different phases of ownership. It's more than just, hey, I own this now, and it's mine. It's, you have to take care of it. You have to understand the expenses that come along with it. So my vision is that there is full understanding. There is a level of transparency so that these new owners, or I'll say tenants, are able to work with one another peacefully, amicably, so that they can continue to work through a common goal, which is to live peacefully, to live affordably.
Could you talk a little bit more about like what's actually happened at Venice Community Housing, or what the specific plans are like that are going on?
So what we do at Venice Community Housing, a lot of what we do, so we've partnered with Community Land Trust. As I was actually walking around the room, there were at least, I think I saw like 2 comments in reference to partnering with Community Land Trust. Through that partnership, it opened the door to not only preservation of the properties that we went into partnership with them, but also offering an opportunity for tenants to reach ownership with these properties. It is offered as an option, whereas they can choose to lean towards ownership and or stay as a rental property. And so what we've done at these properties is we've created a series of community engagement or tenant meetings where we met on a regular basis, whether it's monthly or bi-monthly, depending on what the goal was for transition. However, it gave an opportunity to provide the necessary education behind what ownership or shared ownership would look like. So that means, we're providing written documentation that speaks to what that looks like step by step. And one of the things that I brought up was it may be overwhelming if, we come in the first meeting and we say, here's a book of, everything, and this is how everything, is gonna look like. That can be overwhelming. That can be a lot. Again, we're going into a situation where you're working with people who they didn't go into property management. They didn't go into finance. That's not their actual background, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that they can't learn it. That doesn't mean that they can't gain an understanding of how it works. And so another thing, through these tenant meetings, you learn these tenants, and the tenants learn one another. And one of the key things that I think is effective is operating off of a strength-based leadership style, within that group of tenants, soon to be owners, so that as they're going into this partnership with one another, they know, who's best at this, who can, who's the spokesperson, who's better at finances. Those types of things help, and obviously, with the partnership with Community Land Trust, they help to create a model and give guidance through that process. But my specific area is helping with that morale, helping with the education, helping with the tenant awareness and their involvement. Making sure that there's understanding that they have a right to be involved in the decisions that are being made and the changes that are to come. So yeah, I think in a nutshell. Yeah.
So I'll try to get a little nuts and bolts about this. I mean, first of all, on a high level, the reasons I think it's a good idea to move towards ownership are two reasons. One is to make the place you live a better and a greater community to live in. So it's to have a more comfortable place to live. And the other is to build wealth for yourself or for the people you want to pass that wealth on to. And I just want to pick up on two things that were said by Amanda and Jonathan. It's like, first of all, Amanda said, nobody cares more than the people who live in a building. And I firmly believe that. I also think that nobody knows better than the people who live in a building. And I think, and to pick up on something Jonathan said, I think that one thing that's critical is to give a visibility on what it takes to manage a building, because people often don't know. They don't understand all the things you have to do, the planning, all that stuff that goes into it, because it's complicated. It's not just a matter of saying, yeah, I own this, but you own this and you have responsibilities that come with it, right? And if you want to make your place a great place to live and build wealth, you got to do a good job taking care of that. So in general, though, I'll talk about the way that things worked in New York City a little bit when buildings went co-op. What happens is a corporation was formed for a building. So you had a rental building, and then a corporation was formed to own the building. And then the existing tenants in that building were offered a chance to buy shares in that corporation. So you're technically, it's a co-op, it's a cooperative, but it's a corporation. So technically you're buying shares in a corporation that are associated with an apartment that you live in. So the residents have an option to say, hey, do you want to buy into this building? And they can buy shares into that. And that gives them a right to a particular unit. And it also gives them a right to vote and to be on the board, the governance board, because they're like a board of directors. So they have not only a responsibility to be on that board or be involved with governance, but they have power that goes with that. So I think there's a way to make this work in LA, and I think it has to be tweaked a little bit. And I think there's a real opportunity with Measure ULA dollars, actually, right now, to do this. And I think that the vision for Los Angeles could be something that's called a limited equity housing cooperative, which basically allows residents to buy into the building at a relatively low price, because you don't want to make it prohibitively expensive for people who live there to buy into it. And then they own the same way a New York City co-op does. You own that property collectively, and you elect a board to help govern it. And I think that, and then if you want to move out, you sell your shares. And the limited equity part of it is that the value may be capped at a certain amount, so it can't skyrocket, so it's not speculative, but it is a way to build wealth, and then it keeps the place relatively affordable for the next resident. So that's kind of the idea. And I'll stop and pause there. We can talk about it later, but that's kind of some of the details.
So I think at the Housing Authority, we've done, okay, at the Housing Authority, I think we've taken more of a traditional approach from being a renter to an owner. We have been able to build actual ownership units and made them affordable, and then worked with our residents to try to get our residents ownership ready. So having them work on credit and kind of get ready for that ownership opportunity, and then have been able to transition some of our residents into those ownership units. So I think part of it is, moving from a rental unit into an ownership unit, helping with that process, and then also just developing those affordable ownership units on our properties, or, in the case, we just actually purchased a couple of properties in San Pedro, and we work with organizations like Habitat for Humanity, and Habitat is going to be building about 12 units for us there, and they'll also be working with our residents to find folks who are ready for those units. So I think that's a very traditional concept. That's I know not what we're necessarily trying to do with the conversation here about tenants having agency in the building that they're already in. So I think the model that we have right now, I think it is about building blocks. I think, Jonathan, you talked about that a little bit, about this idea that, you can't necessarily go from day one to the next day to manage the building and own the building and have all that without having a lot of scaffolding around that process. And actually, again, government sometimes does interesting things and good things. There happens to be it's called 24 CFR Part 964. And I had to bring it because I was like I love 24 CFR Part 964. It is a government code, good old government that created a code. This is from HUD, and basically it lays out actually a really good playbook for how to not only allow residents to be elected into leadership within their properties, and how to ensure that those elections are fair, and that leadership changes over time, and other people within those buildings have the chance to be leaders. But it also lays out a path for tenants to basically create a management company. And it talks about what is needed to actually do that, and the money that would be needed to put in, to create a training program, to make sure that people learn all of the details of, what does it mean to be a property manager, what does it mean to do maintenance, and have basically an entire training to develop those organizations, get them into place, and then have them elected by the tenants of the building to become managers. And so that's actually all in this code. I think the unfortunate thing is that we've been able to realize some of that, at least the tenant leadership component, and having tenants and really training tenants on being leaders and participating in that governance process. But we never at least at the Housing Authority, and I have to do more research to see if other housing authorities have actually gotten to that next level of, being able to make that investment in these resident management and then potentially, resident ownership opportunities. But it's interesting to know that there are playbooks and there are models, and And we just have to figure out, and I think one of your questions, and maybe I'm leading into that question, was a little bit about like what are the roadblocks, you know, and what are we excited about? But I feel like that's something that sits with me as a roadblock. So yeah, that's where, like what is the unsticking part of that, and what do we need, how do you get to that next step?
Right.
Wow.
Okay, I really want to get to your question, so this is my last question, and it's kind of like a choose your own adventure grab bag of questions, but the subtext of the question is just convince us that this is possible. So I think that these seem like really great ideas. How does it actually, I think there's like both pitfalls, there's roadblocks, and there's also maybe reasons for hope and reasons that you're like, this really seems possible because of X or Y thing. So pick one of those things. I mean, and just to throw them, just to name some of them, it seems like, how would people possibly get enough money to buy these houses? Where's that money going to come from? How do you make sure that those people don't just get kind of pushed out once the ownership opportunity presents itself? How do you make sure that tenant management is real management? They have real power? How do you kind of ensure that that's really there? So those are some of the things that kind of came to my mind as sort of potential, hopefully, straw people that you can kind of help us envision it for real. Like, what makes you think this is working? That's the question.
Okay, so I'm just going to run two things. They kind of run together in this. I just wanted to say sort of about this last run of questions that residents may not all come from property management backgrounds, but we're experts in what it actually is like to live in them. We know where security fails, where repairs are ignored, what makes people feel safe, and what creates pride in place. Resident leadership does not replace professional management, it strengthens it through accountability and lived expertise. So, you said making sure, like how would we get there? The stream of income funding is already there. So I think I'm a couple questions behind you, but I think the biggest roadblock will also turn into how we get there because it is about being accountable for where the funding comes in. The biggest roadblock in decisions being made by people who don't live with the consequences is being made. The biggest roadblock is decisions being made by people who don't live with the consequences. When security is weak, anyone can come in and damage the building. Residents are often blamed for problems caused by poor management. Another roadblock is assuming that demolition is cheaper than fixing what we already have, but we already have the buildings, units, and space. The issue is not lack of resources, it's lack of accountability, care, and making decisions. And HACLA really isn't doing their job. So one of the problems is that the system is too focused on compliance metrics instead of lived outcomes. And HACLA's process is heavily centered on annual recertification, inspections, and maintaining eligibility for federal funding. And of course, compliance matters. But residents are living with day-to-day consequences when the focus becomes paperwork first and habitability second. And if the agencies responsible for oversight were consistently ensuring safety, repairs, and ADA access, meaningful resident engagement, there would be less need for tenant-run governance. But the reason we're talking about tenant-led management is because too often the lived reality inside the building does not match what's being reported on paper. Because if the system is working, the residents should feel safe in their homes when the priority appears to be recertification and compliance rather than build habitability. And residents are the ones who pay the price. And paper compliance is not the same thing as dignified housing. But the confidence that this could work is that we already know that it can work. We've already discussed it, right? So what gives me the confidence that we already know it can work is because there are SROs and other buildings out there where it is working. There are buildings with strong security, proper guest sign-in, a staff who knows who lives there. There are buildings where tenants are satisfied with the management and feel like repairs are being made thoughtfully. That proves the model is possible. The buildings already exist, the funding exists, and the residents absolutely care. What we need is for the resources and the authority to come down to the resident level. And if someone says, why not demolish and rebuild? And it's because people need housing now. Demolishing existing SROs removes people from their homes homes they currently have and purchase them closer to the street, while new development could take years. We also have empty lots and underused land available for new development if needed. I think the smarter solution is to preserve and repair the housing stock we already have and get it into the hands of the tenants who live there. Because we can't make, again, just to go back, we cannot make decisions about the residents without the residents. We know the money's coming into the system. We know that. There's city funding, state funding, federal funding, philanthropic donations, and executive salaries that approach $500,000 a year. So the issue is not whether resources exist. The issue is that residents are living with the consequences of things being done as cheaply and poorly as possible.
Right.
And we are the ones living with broken security, unsafe access, lack of ADA compliance, and building neglect every single day. So, the budgets may be tight, but they shouldn't be, because the funding streams are in there. But residents should not be absorbing the cost through unsafe living conditions. So when executive compensation, like I said, is nearly $500,000 a year, residents have every right to ask why basic safety and building dignity are still missing. So I think that why a tenant-run building, for people that call a building home, it is almost self-explanatory. Why do any of us care about our houses? Why do any of us would feel comfortable inviting our friends to our houses, expecting the elevators to work, not expecting any surprises in the hallway. People would be incensed if that happened in their own home. And for many of the residents, this is their home. This is their permanent home for low income and hopefully for more unhoused people. And there's so many empty spaces that can be filled with people immediately who are unhoused. And if we had a tenant-run building, believe me, tenants would not let people in there who would destroy the place. They would not let people in there who would vandalize it. They would not let people in there who would destroy the elevators, and it would be ADA compliant, because people in mobility in wheelchairs, in devices, in wheelchairs, in walkers, that have strokes, can neither get up nor down when the elevators do not work. And that's just one small incident. And we have floods and fires and all these different things. And so if you put tenants, a board of tenants, elected by the tenants, with another ethics oversight committee that would oversee these tenants. This is just the basic structure. I actually broke it down and did nuts and bolts too. If anybody's interested, I can always send you copies. But then the only people who would be interested in that are the people that call this home. And as somebody who's been there for 10 years, I would love to have my family over. I would love to feel comfortable having my friends over. I would love to have pride of place and decorate it and keep it nice, not just in my room, which is, I think is darling, but the place in general. And a lot of these buildings are historic buildings, and the part of me that loves history cannot bear to think of abandoning them and letting them fall into such disrepair when there are so many people that love them. So I'll let
So, can everybody repeat after me real quick? Say, I can do this.
I can do this.
Let's say it like you really believe.
No, I can do this.
Say, I can do this.
I can do this.
Now say, we can do this.
We can do this.
Now say it one more time. We can do this.
We can do this.
So, when you said it the first time compared to this last time, there was a difference. There's a bit of a difference. The more you did it with intention, the more strength you gained in the process. So, where there is the more detailed side of things, the business side of things, in order to accomplish or even get there, we have to build the people. We have to strengthen the people. The people that will be running and operating and owning your properties, we have to build you. We have to build one another. As leaders, when you step into a leadership role, there is a learning process. When you first step into your leadership, your first day on the job is like, whoa, hey, you know. And there's a lot you learn on the job. There's a lot that you miss. And there's a learning curve. And so what I understand in that is that if we work with one another to show one another the way, to share with one another the struggles, our ideas, our wants, our desires, we then have an understanding of one another and we can support one another. So that I mentioned earlier, operating off of kind of like a strength-based approach, where there's election or strength-based, whichever works. Obviously, each property or each opportunity, you operate off what works best for you and that group of people. No one way is set for everyone, right? And so, yeah, I think you mentioned having that board of people. So with your property, you want to identify your board. You want to identify, this is where I brought up the strength base. You want to identify those folks that can stand firm in those positions, that can stand firm in when things go haywire, who has to stand up and who can represent in that particular area. You know who to turn to, you know who to go to. And so when we have that understanding of one another, when we have the understanding that, we need to build on this camaraderie, or we need to push one another beyond the struggles from what it is that we see. When we have that understanding, it makes things a little bit easier. It makes it a little bit better, right? So it's like strengthen the people, build on one another. That's how we can get there. That's really truly how we can get there. Yeah.
I absolutely agree, actually. I think it's mostly a failure of imagination and belief that we can get there. And I think that translates into a problem of leadership and the will of our leaders, and the folks who are in control, who are setting the agenda. And I think in general, that's the biggest roadblock I see, is that people don't think that this should happen because maybe the people living there don't deserve it. All right? And I think that's it. So I think that we need to change that mindset, our mindset, and we have to change that mindset of the leadership to say, hey, no, we're going to build a structure where this can happen, and we can see something different than what exists now. So, I don't think you should live in a building for 10 years without the option to have a chance to own something. Own it.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Leave with nothing.
Right. So you're going to leave with nothing, right? And that doesn't seem right. And I think a lot of people can understand that. And when you go talk about governance and tenant governance and real power, I think that in my opinion, is far stronger if it's rooted in actual ownership. Where you know that if you do a good job with this, you're going to benefit. It's going to benefit you. That's right. Because it's going to be a better place to live, which is what you want. But also because you're building what I would call real equity, wealth, right? And some kind of, and you're accumulating that. And maybe you don't have a lot of chances in your life to do something like that. But this is the most important place for you, and also your most important asset. So you're going to care more than anybody. So I think we need to start to change that mindset. And in very practical terms, I think we need to I think we could look for a building in Skid Row, that could qualify, figure out who owns it, and say, how do we do this? And it could be a building that's owned or controlled by the city or the county, or it could be from a private developer who says, I have this building, but they may say, oh, it's really difficult because I'm losing money on it all the time because I got to pay for security and I got to pay for my management company. I don't know the pipe burst until too late, and then it causes all kinds of damage. Say, well, actually, we all know about that, and we'll do a better job. We'll keep the door shut and make sure nobody comes in here who shouldn't be in here. And as soon as there's a leak, we're going to be on it, and we're going to also help that person who's got the toilet always backs up, and we're going to make sure it doesn't, because we actually own a portion of that, and there's a benefit for us if we keep stay on it. And we're closest to the ground, we're closest to it, so we're going to make sure it works. And you have a conversation like that with the owner, and you say, okay, we want to buy this building that you're losing money on from you, and we want to own some shares in that. And maybe the owner keeps a couple of those apartments also, right? Because maybe not everybody can do it. And then together, you build a building that is a happier place to live and ultimately more valuable. That to me seems like the potential that can be unlocked. And I think it could start with one building, and then maybe see if it works, and then start with other buildings. And it doesn't have to just be in Skid Row. It could also be in other places in LA. But anyway, that's like the nuts and bolts way. And by the way, Measure ULA, if you read the details, it's not just about building more rental units. It's about, it specifically includes dollars for home ownership assistance programs, community-led land trusts, and limited equity housing cooperatives. And not only that, the new budget that was just proposed by HUD also moves, they want to close down the COC, but they want to move more money towards home ownership and ownership opportunities. So it may seem crazy, but maybe DC would actually be in favor of doing something like this right now. So I'd say let's try to work with it. And anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
I can't remember the question. Because it's been a while, but I feel
Make
like
us feel like it's possible. What do you think is?
Yeah, so I was pretty sure that was a question. I think what gets me excited about the possibility and the belief that it is possible, especially in Los Angeles, is, you know, kind of seeing, having been here for a while and seeing the growth of community land trusts, I think is really something that, to me, is a flag. You know, it's to me it's saying, you know, that this is something that is starting. You know, I worked originally with Trust South LA, you know, as they were kind of coming up and developing, and they were really, you know, kind of the first land trust that we had in the city. And now we have so many more smaller community land trusts, and you know, it's very exciting to see that work happen. It's obviously small scale, but as you talked about it, maybe it's one building, maybe it's, you know, but I do think that if we can see these things starting to grow and seed, and you have a lot of community interest in it, and then you have foundations, and I have to say, you know, it isn't just vision, but dollars and cents help with you know, realizing some vision. So, you know, I know that if, you know, we have a lot of foundations that are interested in the ideas around tenant ownership and land trust, and so I do feel like there's momentum. So I think that is what makes me feel very confident that these models will start to populate in LA, and we'll figure out what the LA model looks like. And it may not be the New York model, and it may not be, I think, you know, it seems like everybody in the world has been to Copenhagen or, I don't know, Europe somewhere, and said, why can't we just do what we, you know, what they're doing there? But I think we can figure out what the LA model looks like. I think the other thing that I would say that gives me hope is when I look around, at least the organization that I work in, I know that a lot of my fellow employees either grew up in public housing, grew up in Section 8, have family that still lives in public housing, have family that still lives in Section 8. You know, they have lived experience. And I think that's the other thing that I think is really important, is that the organizations that are leading efforts around helping community need to always, in whatever way they can, involve that community. So you know, I think that keeps us grounded in understanding what it feels like to live in the units that we manage, to, you know that experience, and to be very empathetic and thoughtful about what we do, because it isn't top down. It's people coming in from, you know, being in that experience and then serving back. You know, what they, you know, a lot of them can come to the table saying, my family got so much out of having this roof over our head, you know, and I want to give that to other people. So I think that's really helpful too, and I see that in a lot of our nonprofits. I see that in our tenant organization. Again, I think that we are a very people-focused community here in LA, and that there is a lot of advocacy happening in this moment, and in the past, you know, couple of decades that I've been here, I've seen a lot of organizing around downtown, and I think that, you know, it's exhausting, I think, for folks to feel like, it feels like, you know, you take one step forward and 2 steps back. But anyway, I think that gives me hope, that conversations can still happen. People may not always agree completely on the path, but we're talking and we're trying to figure it out.
Okay, now we're at the question and answer, and if I know my audience, there will also be just some comments in the guise of questions. So yeah, first of all, let's just see hands of everyone who has questions. How many got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 questions, 15 questions. Okay. So that's a lot of questions. We have about 15 or so minutes to do questions.
Oh, wow.
So here's what I'm gonna try. Every time we do this, it's like, it goes slightly wrong in a different way, but we're gonna try something different this time. What I'd like to do is I'm gonna take the questions in banks of 5, and then give the panelists a chance to answer kind of like what they got in there. Does that make sense? And we'll try to get through as many as we can. I want to try to wrap the event before we sort of like lose energy and deflate. So I want to kind of keep it to 15. We can hang out and have informal conversation for as long as people have energy for it. Okay, so let's do 5 questions. I see some like real amped up energy for a question over there. Let's do, so raise your hand. Let's do, okay, let's do you, and you, and you. We'll do these 5, ask your questions in a row, and then we'll get,
That's a hard on that to answer the question.
One of the left.
This question maybe come on over here to pass the mic around or whatever, or just yell.
My question, Jenny, right? And what was your title again?
Chief Development Officer.
Chief Development Officer. Briefly, my question is, I don't know anything about policy development or implementation. I'm just a regular ground level person. And my experience with HACLA has always been that HACLA appears very opaque and distant. And by the time policy gets down to the ground level, it's extremely pro forma. And as Amanda mentioned, it's about, you know, really arcane specifics that really have nothing to do with lived experience in the buildings. And how is this new development process going to be radically different from this kind of distant, opaque experience where HACLA is subsidizing very dilapidated, insecure, unsafe, poorly maintained buildings? How is this going to be different than that?
And we're going to take 4 more questions, and then we'll kind of get into it.
Okay, who's next?
Hi everybody, my name is Ramona Ayala. I live in a development, which is at William E. My question to Jenny is, our developments are going to be demolished. We do not want that. We never got a chance to vote, which they said the residents have the right? We didn't have that. You guys just decided to do it. We're all of us that come from William E. We have anxiety. We're thinking of how long it's going to take. We do not want demolished. We want people to repair our apartments. We have gotten inspection up to 96% of our inspection, which we do good. We were the highest ones evaluated, and you know that. So please, you know you want that. We didn't get to vote, so we want that vote. We want people to help us, to support us, because we're not alone. We're gonna try. I'm the voice for people that cannot come. And I've been there living for 60 years, my whole life. So please, do not demolish. We want repair. Thank you.
Okay, buenas noches, yo voy a hablar en español. Mi nombre es Antonia Álvarez, vengo también de William E. Y estoy de acuerdo con muchas cosas de las que dijo la señora. ¿Por qué no construir donde hay un espacio vacío? ¿Por qué destruir a William E? Yo llevo ahí viviendo 43 años. Ahí crié mis 3 hijos. Okay, vamos a poner.
My name is Antonia Alvarez. I've lived here at William Mead for 43 years, and I want to uplift a lot of what you said about the importance of having residents make decisions in the projects.
Okay. Está diciendo la señora Jenny que podemos tener los inquilinos un liderazgo y tomar control, ¿no? Participar. Pero eso es mentira, porque cuando empezaron a hablar de la demolición, no nos hablaron claramente. No se nos dijo, vamos a demoler.
Okay, so as Jenny says, that it's really important to have tenant leadership and for tenants to really direct a process. But when it came to the demolition of William Mead, which was proposed a few years ago, these ideas of tenant leadership were lies. They weren't true. Because at the beginning, there wasn't a very clear conversation about whether or not a demolition was happening. So we didn't know.
Okay, desde un principio se nos habló con evasivas, con mentiras. Nunca fueron claros con nosotros. Este lugar se va a demoler. Okay, son 415 apartamentos y quieren demoler para hacer 1,600. Es bastante, es mucho. Y lo que yo digo es, ¿por qué van a demoler ahí un lugar que en el pasado y todavía en el presente se está considerando histórico?
So these apartments, there are 415 public housing units, and the Housing Authority wants to demolish them and build 1,600 units, which was not initially explicitly discussed with the tenants. And I want to know why the Housing Authority wants to do this if these are buildings that are historic.
And could we try to wrap it up? We only have 15 minutes, so we have to go back to it.
Okay. Para terminar, quiero decir que nosotros estamos protestando contra la demolición, pero lo que ha pasado es que intimidan a los residentes. Si hablamos o nos oponemos, nos van a desalojar. Y tenemos miedo porque what's going to happen to us? And they evict us because we oppose to the demolition. Most of the people, we are old. And what's going to happen? They're going to throw us to the skid row. We're too old for that. So that's why we're fighting to stay in there. That's all. Thank you very much.
Two more questions, and then we'll hear from the panelists. And if you could try to ask questions of the other panelists also. Would be courtesy.
I've lived at the Roswell for over 10 years now, and I wanted to share that the question pertains to people like me who have been trying to do society for, I've been trying to live in the real world from 1997 to 2008 and beyond, 2014 really, and society just kept on spitting me out and discarding me, and so I just gave up because I'm autistic and I just don't fit in with society. So I'm wondering, how would this work for somebody like me? This is kind of going over my head, I'll be honest, a lot of this stuff. But how would this work for me when I only make, I have a very fixed income of $50 from GR and $100 from VA because I was in the Army for a while. They split me out too. So how would this work? How would I afford this if I only make $200? And would I be able to do this? Would somebody like me be able to do this?
Good question. What I want to give each one of you is a seed that you can plant and follow the power so that we all can become one. Because I believe in the power of one, we can overcome and get things done so that we can make these changes with ownership. Just to keep working on things. what we need to do, what I believe we need to do is we need to form our own management companies in places like the Skid Row History Museum where we all can come together and learn to be a management company, learn what we need to do to have ownership, learn what it takes to be co-op, learn what it takes to buy a land so that we each can build tiny homes or to take a warehouse. It would cost maybe $200,000 for each one of those things that I just named, and it now costs the city $600,000 to build a unit for all these new buildings that are going up. So it won't only save the city 1/3 the money, it's going to give dignity and pride so that we can take these old money pit buildings and have a state of emergency declaration, because we are #1 in the state with homelessness, and we're the 4th richest city. How can this be? We did it with the COVID hotels. We had a state of emergency. We got travel lodges to be done into COVID hotels within 24 hours, and we got over 13,000 people housing people off the addictions. We can do this. Skid Row, we are the people, our dream achievers. We are community weavers. We are leaders that make change, and we can do this, but we have to become one, and we each need to be trained so that we can go to the city and say, okay, we have a management company, and this is what we're going to do. This is our budget. We're buying this. We're going to build 20 homes. We need you to subsidize this so that it would cost us less. It would cost me less than what it does for me to rent, to buy my own home and come up with a plan. But we've got to do it together as one in the power of one.
Okay, so now we have a moment to respond, and then we'll do, I think probably it's time for one more bank of 5 questions. But any of you in any order, if you have a thought of any of these things that came up. So, how would this work for someone like me? How does tenant decision-making really work at William Mead? Why wasn't I consulted? Thoughts on any of these questions? Any of you can answer.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, so my personal thought is, having been a resident for such a long time, is that, and I know this seems like bag on HACLA time, but but HACLA just is concerned about getting their funding. Their philanthropic funding, their state funding, and their federal funding, and it bottlenecks at the top and doesn't come down to the bottom. So you have you have rooms that are 150 feet, 150 square feet, or possibly 200 or possibly 100. They might have a closet, they might not. Whatever it is, they're getting $2,300 a month, between $2,100 and $2,300 a month from all this funding. And then they are charging the residents the balance. So they are always getting $2,300 a month. It costs, why should they, the disrepair that has happened in these buildings did not happen overnight. And it will not be fixed overnight. But it will never be fixed if all the money stays at the top and never comes down to flushing toilets, hot water, and a real serious and unstigmatizing tenants. There is a feeling, and maybe I thought it was just me when I moved in, but there's a certain feeling about the people that live in SROs, and maybe this is in downtown. I only have experience in downtown. But there's we're all painted with a broad brush. Mm-hmm. It said if you only worked harder, you have a whole lot more. What have you done that has so screwed up your life that you have to be down here? You disenfranchised from your family, you out of jail. Not any of that should be important to being a full human being, but what's wrong with you? So when something breaks, it's the tenant's fault. Why fix it when you're only going to break it again? So the idea of actually having somebody come and say, you know what, we believe in you. We want you to be a part owner of these buildings. Is like saying, why would we give up getting all this money for doing absolutely nothing? I mean, why would we do that? So I think it really is. It sounds great, and I hope it works. But I think there has to be a lot of real milestones that have to be met for the confidence to come, and because the tenants will not invest themselves, they'll invest themselves in themselves, right? But and keeping themselves safe, but they're not going to invest themselves in a building that will never be theirs, and that if the people are threatening to tear down all the time. We already saw what happened with another group, and And so that's my concern and my feeling.
Accountability is important for these landowners. You know, it's used to no money for people dying in their hotels here. Accountability is what we need. Prison, accountability. It has to be, we have to start with that. That has to be done. Nobody has ever been prosecuted for putting people down.
Right.
I'm sorry. Accountability is it. I wanted to respond to the gentleman that asked if this is something that could work for him. Based on my experience working with Community Land Trust, the models that are out there, the model of how this works is created to accommodate all of us. It's created to accommodate, you know, the different incomes, low incomes. You know, it's made to accommodate what, you know, the different backgrounds, different demographics. It's not created to create you know, those types of barriers or make you feel like you can't play a part or be a part of an opportunity like this. You know, it takes the series of education. It takes the series of learning. You know, much like we're in here now, holding opportunities to understand what those models look like and how they can actually work for you. If my income is fixed, how can this actually work for me in the long run? Not just short term, but in the long run. What's going to happen after all of the partners and all of the extra people that's working with us to get here, once they're gone, once we've transitioned and we own this, how can I have enough faith and trust in this model to know that in the long run we'll still be here and okay. So the educational process and the trainings that's necessary to understand, I think that will help provide reassurance for it, essentially.
Education.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I also would like to address, I didn't catch your name. You live at the Rosalind and Jay Allen. Nice to hear what you have to say. And I have to, I mean, honestly, I don't know if it can work. But that's what I was going to say, but then I was thinking about it, and I think it could work.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not in the same way as it would for everybody, but it could work because I'm going to say, like, a co-op, when it's basically a cooperative corporation, right? And it means there's shares. So maybe because of a certain resident has a certain kind of income, I think people would want it to work. And maybe you don't have as many shares, but you have some shares. So that you have an ownership stake that's kind of can work in a way that gives you an ownership stake in the building, but maybe isn't the equivalent of everybody else's. But that's just the way it is. It's like you own some stock in, you own some stock in the corporation, but you have some stock and you have a chance to build something, and then maybe you can build more and more and more. So I think there probably is a way to make it work. The details are really important, and really what I would say is the way to start, because I think it can be overwhelming, is to figure out how it can work in one building as a model to start out with, and say, hey, let's just make it work in this one building, and then let's learn some things and see if we can then apply it to other buildings, and let's show that it can work, get some attention, and just get some traction.
Yeah, thank you. Can I give appreciation for you really bringing up the importance of understanding the shares and how that works?
No, I mean, it's totally critical. I mean, that's the thing I think that that's critical to understand, is that you don't, in a co-op, you don't own the actual built unit. You don't own the four walls. You own shares in that cooperative. You own shares in the company. So you can have varied amounts of that. And yeah, and I have to say, I think that there's a way to make this work where the people who own the buildings now still own a portion of those shares in the building as like a sponsor. So they're participating too, because maybe they can get some things done that the residents can't. And I'll just say this, on a very high level, if you look at the way the buildings that Leo bought, he spent $10 million for 1,200 units, which turns into purchase price. And again, there's all kinds of details on this, and I don't really know all the details. But if you just do the math on it, it's $8,333 per unit.
Oh, yes.
Right. So what it means is there's $8,333 per unit. And again, there's other things, because there's probably encumbrance, there's probably debt. It's more complicated than just that. I'm not going to say it was just like that, but what it means is there's opportunity for growth. And I think that especially if you get the people who are living in the building involved with managing the building, you can find opportunities to solve the problems that are giving Leo headaches about his buildings, because the residents who live in there know and they care, right? So it could be a win-win-win for everybody, I think.
I think it's great.
So I think there are a couple of questions on inspections, and that is not my area, but I know that that is something that has been, is important from a meet the guidelines, right? Meet the regulations, and so I know that it is sometimes it is a checkbox of looking exactly at your list and what does your list tell you need to be looking for, and not necessarily looking beyond the list. And I hear you about that is something that our inspectors, we would hope our inspectors would do more, right? And so I think that that's an important takeaway, and I'm happy to take that back and talk to our Section 18 about what can we do better, differently, more. I also know that when you determine that a unit doesn't meet inspection, there's consequences, right? And that is also something that I do know that our inspectors take into consideration, right? Because it's not just consequences to the owner of the building, but it's consequences potentially to the tenant who's in that unit. Because if they determine that your unit doesn't meet inspection, right, then HACLA is not able to continue subsidizing that unit. And so I think that's where things get complicated. But, and I think that we take those moments very seriously. And so I think it's about what can we do in the in-between, right? Between not necessarily, taking away subsidy, but pushing on the improvements that need to be made. And Cecil, I think, is a good example of, at the Cecil, we had a lot of Section 8, we still have Section 8 tenants there, but we had Section 8 tenants there. The building did not pass, we ultimately decided, like last year, building did not pass inspection. And so, what do you do in those circumstances? And part of it was working with each tenant individually and determining, did they want to leave? And so we spent a lot of time helping tenants if they wanted to relocate, helping them find a place to relocate. Some tenants didn't want to, and that was, again, it's about, that choice that tenant had to make in that circumstance. But I hear you about how do we navigate the in-between, and could we do better at that? I'm sure the answer is always yes, we can always do better. For William Mead, and thank you to our tenants who are here from William Mead, and our tenant organizers who've been working with them. So William Mead is a property, just for those who aren't aware, because I know we're here talking about downtown officially. It's downtown adjacent, so I feel like it fits in the bill of downtown discussion, but it is a property we own that is just kind of over by the State Historic Park, for those who want to orient themselves. And that is a property that has been around since the 1940s. Unfortunately, it's made of brick. It doesn't meet our current codes for safety. We don't have, unfortunately, there's no rebar behind that brick. So it's very difficult for us to look at any way to potentially safely rehab those buildings. In addition to that, when public housing was placed in the city of Los Angeles in the 1940s and 1950s, it was put into areas that the city didn't want to have any other sort of good residential housing there. So they said, you can put your housing here on this industrial property. You can put your housing here on this oil field. And so when William Mead was built, it was built on top of basically an oil refinery. And so, the land underneath those buildings is still contaminated. And there is, we are doing soil sampling around, we are doing soil vapor sampling around. That contamination needs to be cleaned up, and you cannot get to it until you remove the buildings. And frankly, at the end of the day, whether it's a government that owns a building, a tenant organization that owns a building, a nonprofit that owns a building, at the end of the day, we should all be thinking about our residents' safety and caring for our residents' safety. And so that is those are difficult decisions that we have to make as owners about what are the implications.
Displacing a whole community. Can you change the code?
But
are you evicting people? Is that helping their safety by evicting them?
We're not evicting them, so I want to get to that.
Yeah.
So we are absolutely not evicting any single resident.
That's what you say today.
That's speaking and then. I understand that the residents are concerned because people have told them that they're being evicted. HACLA has told them and will continue to tell them and has provided them this in writing. They are not going to be evicted. They will not be evicted. We do what's called build first. Build first means that we build a building either on the site, right, where we may have some open space, and we move residents from their current unit into that new unit. So every resident at William Mead will remain at William Mead if they want to remain at William Mead. And they will always have a right to a unit at William Mead. And it just depends on when they will be moving, and that will depend on how quickly we can build new units. And when they are being told that it's time to leave their unit, it's with an offer to move into a brand new unit on that property after we have cleaned it and we've created brand new units for them. So that is the process that we've undertaken. Many of our residents have had the opportunity to go to other properties that we own where we've used a similar process, and they've talked to the residents who live there and have found in those discussions with those residents that what we said happened is exactly what happened. We have examples down at Jordan Downs, which is not that far from downtown either, down in Watts, where our residents moved from their old units into a brand new unit. And so that's how we operate. We are a housing agency. We are not an unhousing agency. Our mission and sole mission is affordable housing. It is our goal to build more affordable housing, and we also think that if we are in a position where we have to demolish a building, it is, we believe, our imperative to try to build more units, because we have 45,000 people on our wait list, waiting for 7 years, 10 years to get a unit. So to me, I feel it is my imperative to build more units when I can to house more people. And so I think when we have to do things like demolish, it's with that in mind about, okay, so if I have to think about what is the new community that we're gonna build here, how can I build for more people? How can we house more people? How can we expand this community? But it is also done with absolutely our current residents in mind, and ensuring that their housing is always protected, their right to housing is always protected, and they are the first ones who will be given a right to a new unit in that same property.
Can I go first? I've been holding it in for a long time. Okay, so here in my hands, I came ready. I have documents, right, from the HUD place for a project-based Section 8 voucher at the new residence where the rice cake factory used to be. And you guys were saying stuff about we could own or have some type of say-so in something. Based off of this CSC system right here, they ask you a series of questions, right? And those questions, based off of the score, place you at the top of the list for housing. Now, based off of those questions, they place me in a place, right, where you have domestic violence, current human trafficking, and current drug use, and the supportive services are not so supportive. Now, also, I received some notices for move-in payments that were the supportive service people were responsible for, but unfortunately, I got notices from property management telling me that this is to bring awareness. This is a legal document. That's not awareness. You causing me to have anxiety. Another thing I want to say is they're creating a safe environment. I'm being harassed. LAPD is being called out. DCFS is being called out. Me and my children are unsafe. I have neighbors coming in, kicking down my door, attempting to kick down my door, and yet I have to be the humble one and let property management know, let supportive services know. And it's like, because I'm doing that, I document, I notate, I even went to the library, printed out penal codes, let property management know. The people who are responsible, I can't get their names because why are you protecting these people? I'm not the one being violent. I have a history of being violent, of consistently being violent, but that's not the narrative now. So they're telling me I can't get their names for restraining orders, which that's a reason to get a restraining order. This person is violently kicking my door in. Neighbors are complaining. LAPD already let it be known I'm a victim of a crime, harassment. Y'all making false accusations. You're putting my safety and my children's safety in danger. So my question to you is, based off of, this is for Justin and Jenny, based off of this system and the development that you guys are having, you guys are developing so many units, apartment buildings. What about housing, like homes, actual homes, family-sized homes, townhomes for women with children or family units instead of these apartment buildings? Because it's like, based off of this system, you're putting us in the same environment that's creating poverty. And then it's like we're trying to get out of poverty, and yet you have this system within a system with supportive services who view a person who, like myself, I may not look like I belong down here, but don't judge me because I love myself and I went through treatment to learn new coping skills, mechanisms, and things like that, and want to do better. You view me as a threat to your program, and because you view me as a threat, you try to suppress me and keep me humble, but that's not your job to do that. So my question to you is, how are you guys going to change that? What are you guys going to do differently? How can I be safe to know that with this voucher, because I also was lied to and told that I can't use my voucher to move into another building. I was told that based off of this situation, I was offered another unit within the building. I declined. And so because of that, I'm in fear that next month my rent will not be accepted because I did not accept the offer of moving into their building. And so you two guys, what type of advice or what type of solution do you think you guys could offer? Like, what's the next steps, or how can something be done? Because this is kind of like your guys' job, and thanks for the accountability. But I think it has to, like she said, trickle down, like the money, it has to go from the top to the bottom. So under your care, your orders, your positions, somebody has to answer to this, because either it's two things for me that's gonna happen out of this. Either I'm gonna end up in a mental institution, or I'm gonna end up in jail because of these organized crimes. And then if I react to the consistency of the violence, they're not gonna be held accountable. I am, and I'm tired of being held accountable for other people's bullshit. So what can we do differently? What is the solution? Not a temporary solution to move me into another unit in the building, and this person is still comfortable enough to come kick my door down and make false accusations to law enforcement and DCFS, which can create a narrative to where I can never get my children back. I have a problem with that. And I don't want to hear political answers. I don't want to hear I want to hear real shit, because I feel like, you know, like we just get the typical answers or the typical politic answers, and this is my life. This is my safety. This is my children.
Thank you.
what is wrong with 16 of us out here creating a group, a property management group, putting that property management group in an irrevocable foreign trust, and letting that trust, fund that trust with proper funding to the building that will be bought or put in this trust, that all these 16 people have duties in this trust. So in other words, it's a learning curve. Yeah. We're learning how to build generational wealth by dealing with a trust. We're learning what a beneficiary is and who's a trustee, all that, because it's generational wealth. Because generational wealth starts with trust. Just why when you said land trust, it rung a bell. But what about the whole idea about an irrevocable foreign trust? So this America system that we know is screwed up, because they ain't arrest nobody from the Epstein files, and they all screwed up. So if we step outside their jurisdiction, they can't fade us.
My question is to you, what are better checks and balances for people to like maybe get interviewed, or maybe even like inspect the buildings like a little bit better, you know, to kind of like not have that broad brush painted on all of us? Because, you know, he like didn't even ask me anything, and just took one look at me as like, you need to get out of here, basically, you know, because he said it's not safe, people kick in the building, you know, the doors, and they break in, you know, everywhere, you know, the bathrooms get broken in, you know, there's all sorts of drugs and, you know, and violence in the building. So like, my question is basically, do we have those better checks and balances in place to make sure that people are taken care of the way they need to be?
I'll be very quick, very quick. I also worked for LASHA for a little while, and in my experience, what was most upsetting about working for LASHA was to learn and to discover the collaboration between police and policing and an organization that's charged with the responsibility of ending homelessness in Los Angeles. So I hear a lot of like onus and responsibility being placed on the tenants and people living outside, but there are people who sit in positions of power who are able to produce policy, like enforcing the policy of LASHA that says encampment sweeps are damaging and harmful and actually kill people. You're in the position of power to enforce your own policy, but for years and years it does not happen. And so what I want to talk about is power. Where is power located? There's a huge system here that's saying no to every tenant and every person living in an encampment when they say we want to have our own home. So that's not our responsibility, actually. That's your responsibility, actually, is to create the environment that would allow people to have their own square of land. Currently, there are people destroying ULA, trying to, right? There are people, cops out here, sweeping unhoused folks off the street every single day, all damn day. These are people who are coming in and out of SROs, right? That spectrum between living in an encampment and living in an SRO is a fluid line. People are moving back and forth on it all the time. So what are you gonna do in a position of power to change the culture of policing and violence that is preventing people from having autonomy in their own safe homes? You.
La pregunta es si Mrs. Scanlin es director de desarrollo de HACLA, ¿por qué tomaron la decisión de la demolición sin preguntarnos a los residentes?
So my question to Jenny is, if you're the Director of Development for the Housing Authority, talking about the importance of tenant governance, tenant participation, why did you make the decision to demolish William Mead without taking resident input into account and having residents actually make the decision to do this or not?
Go ahead. I just wanted to talk about the issue about the co-op housing. The income is a real problem. In our building, almost no one gets an income above $1,200 a month. So it would be really hard to do that. And I'm wondering, where can we find additional income to pay for that? Could we tax unused condos, which are all over the place in downtown LA? And could we ask them to, like in many countries, if you have unused land, the state takes it over, and in democratic countries, by the way, and takes it over and uses it for housing. Could we tax high-income condos, which do not trickle down? They never have trickled down to produce housing for the poor. And could we do something like that?
but the buildings from Willie Meads, the brick buildings, are still good enough for the next 35 years. However, you mentioned that it's at least 35 years. However, you mentioned it is dangerous to do any of that living in there. But there's plenty of brick buildings around here that are also part of historical related type of stuff. And it's kind of ironic how you mentioned, let's demolish the buildings first and then fix the soil. Lincoln Heights also mentioned something about the soil. I love the distraction that you're going from, oh, hey, let's not tell the residents. Let's just talk about how the building is and let's talk about how the soil is. That's not the main point. The main point is I wanted everybody in the neighborhood to know from, once again, when I was in high school, this was 2018, when rumors started going around. Then 2020, they mentioned, oh, we're gonna demolish it within the next, what, how many years? And what, 2025, 2026, what, 2028, around there? And then things kept changing. So I'm over here confused. Once again, everybody's panicking. And then right now we're dealing with people who are afraid of leaving out of their homes because of ICE. And then the people who are undocumented are leaving and trying to move and be relocated. What about the victims that will be taken away and deported?
I've appreciated just how much focus is on tenants and making sure that their leadership is foundational. And I'm thinking really about the leadership piece for this and how in the vision of talking about co-ops, you're building in this piece of what's happening for them so that even when they're going off to other sites, they're getting the credentials, they're getting the licensing, and creating the kinds of work for people who have different kinds of learning styles, and really building this into the vision for it. So just one, how that leadership pipeline, how you envision that, and how do you make sure the blueprint piece that was talked about is getting created so that when you have one model, there is really building a blueprint for what's coming out of this so that it doesn't have to keep getting repeated each time within communities, and just making sure that there's true leadership that's coming out of that. I work in supportive services, and being on the direct line, there's so much information that I feel puzzled with right now on how to navigate what I'm hearing from my peers, what I'm hearing from residents, and how to just create, just more of a transparent pipeline and creating it so that when new programs do get developed, that transparency is still there and that accountability has been built into it. So any insight on how you're building that?
We have a lot of questions, and we do probably need to wrap up. Sorry, students, so I forgive the panelists for speaking briefly, but please answer the questions. I know there's so many things that.
Yeah, so I want to reiterate there's a difference between a brick building that has steel behind it and a brick building that doesn't have steel behind it. So if the Rosalind is a brick building that has steel behind it, then the structure of that building is in much better shape and is most likely going to withstand earthquakes, right? And withstand other potential whatever hits us in this climate change era, right? But if the brick building does not have steel behind it, it is not structurally sound or safe, and particularly in an area like LA that has earthquakes. The city's building department came up with new building codes, and everyone who owns what's called a non-ductile building was given a notice to inspect their building and determine if their building met current earthquake codes or not. And if it did not, then you had to come up with a plan to make your building safe. So I don't know. And in fact, we were waiting on, they were doing an inspection of the Rosalind to actually see what is behind the brick, because there is concern that we don't know, because the plans on the Rosalind are so old that the city was not sure, and city inspectors were looking at the building to see if it actually did have steel or not. So I know that, I think that has been completed. I don't know the results of that testing, but they did do destructive testing on the building to see if it actually was a secure building or not. I do know for William Mead, because we're the owner there, right, we do our own inspections of our buildings, so we know what is behind the brick and what isn't behind the brick. So there we do know that we don't have that steel or rebar that you would need to ensure that that building was going to withstand earthquakes. We have been very lucky that it has to date, but it doesn't meet current code or safety standards. So that's the difference. I just want to make that distinction. I think there were some questions. You had a question about, it sounded like a question about safety in your own building, concern of violence. There is protection for residents who are experiencing that. And so I think I would like to maybe talk to you afterwards about your circumstance and see and understand a little bit more about where you're living and your voucher. So I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about your specific circumstance.
Thank you.
And then I appreciate you bringing up and I would like to also talk to you afterwards to hear what the building was that you went to and you know, the experience that you had. I think, you know, these are important things for you to raise. I think it's important for us as an organization, if it was a property manager that is one of our property managers, to understand why that was the interaction that you had. We have to continually train. If that was a property manager, then we will be training.
But it was also obvious to me with my own two eyes to say that this place was like not safe. And seeing all the busted doors, I'm just like, oh yeah, I can.
Yeah, so
can
I don't
totally,
know if that was
like,
one of
you
our
know,
properties,
do whatever I'm
but
doing.
we should talk about that. And I think that there are a lot of referrals that happen in the system, and you can talk a little bit more about referrals to buildings and choices that people are given about where they can live and what choices, you know, what agency do you have to say no or, you know, to say I need to
Because I don't want that to be a
someplace
strike
else.
against me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just say that too, is I do think that in both of your cases, I think that our coordinated entry system doesn't do a great job of giving people a voice about where they want to be. I think that a lot of places where they put families are not great for families. I think there should be generally more segmentation in the kind of housing we have. So places that are better for pet owners, or people who are better for families, or people who are better for, if you just speak Spanish, this is a building that's for people who just speak Spanish. It's like, you know, I think there's a lot of different ways that we should structure it. And basically on the CES, when you fill out the VI SPID ad or you fill out the LA ad, it's like you get an 8 or not. And that's about it. And then if you get an 8, you're in the system. If you don't, then you're not. Then good luck.
It's
And
the questions that they ask
questions
too, though, like, are you a victim of domestic violence?
I know the questions. I know the questions. I know.
In places where you get people here get beat, then you got active human trafficking and drugs. Like, revise the questions.
Look, I agree, revise the question, but I also think that the buildings we have to have different kinds of buildings for different groups of people. And one of the things about a co-op, if you co-op in New York City, for example, buildings gone co-op, there's an interview process to join the building.
Right.
All right. And I'm not saying this works for every place, and this certainly is exclusive, right? But they look at people and say, is this going to be a person who's going to fit in our community? All right. And there are issues with that. It's not perfect, but it's a way that it works, at least. And it doesn't have to work for everything, but for some buildings it works like that. And I think that that could be something that, and I don't have the answers now, and what I'm talking about is something I feel like we're aspiring to in terms of trying to get to this ownership paradigm. We're not there, but I think that it does solve some of these problems that you're experiencing now. But we have to get there, and I'd say just let's find 1 or 2 buildings to try to do it as a pilot and get it going. All right, you know. I will say something about the LASHA governance. Sorry to you know. First of all, LASHA's governance is not optimal. All right, by any means. We're governed by a 10 member commission. 5 of those are appointed by Mayor Bass.
I'm familiar with this.
So yeah, you're familiar. So and then we pick the CEO, and you know, I think that it really we've had 6 or 7 CEOs in as many years, so we haven't had a lot of leadership consistency, and that's on the commission. I'm 1 vote on that. I'm here. I'm trying. I'm listening. I'm trying. That's all I can say. So.
You vote too,
I feel like there's more that can be said, though. I mean,
there is more. Oh, I can say a lot more. I know. No, I can say.
I mean, because LASHA workers are actively assigned to sweeps teams throughout the entire city, from the beginning of that program, when Heidi Marston and Peter Lynn and Heidi Marston were there, and so there's been all this time to look at that and consider it and think about what does an outreach agency that's responsible for supporting people have to do with the cops. And so there's been a lot of time. So I understand you're 1 person, but it needs to be said that like.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
That has to be looked at. We can't even get our audit, our financial audit, to HUD on time.
Still not our problem.
Oh, I know, but I'm saying it's indicate. No, I mean, hey, look, I agree with you, but I'm saying that LASHA has a lot of problems.
But I want you as one person to say, what am I gonna commit to doing to change the culture of policing poor people in this city? You, Justin, what am I gonna do? I would love to hear that.
Yeah.
No, right now. What are you gonna do?
You know, I think I'm happy to talk to you about it, but I got time. Look, I didn't come here to talk about that.
But that creates this, okay? That's the reality. That violence out here in these streets creates the violence in these buildings.
I agree with you. I agree with you. We need to work on reducing the level of violence. Just full stop.
I think we need to keep moving. Any last words from the last two panelists?
I think that there was a question in reference to the CLT versus foreign trust. Thank you.
Yes.
I honestly, I don't know a lot about the foreign trust option. However, my work with the Community Land Trust and what we're seeing overall with the growth and with how effective the modeling has been thus far, my recommendation is to try a process that's working. Try a process that is effective. Every process you're gonna have to tweak along the way. Everything you're gonna have to change to be tailor-made to what works for you and the group of people that you're organizing with. You know, and then from there, if there is an opportunity to grow from that, to create from that, do that, would be my recommendation. And if there's more to learn, I mean, I would have to do my own research in reference to the foreign trust, of course, but speaking to what I do know, speaking to, you know, a program or model that is effective, that we're seeing, you know, throughout the state and throughout, you know, other areas. Yeah, you know, so it's a lot, you know, but it's worth just taking the time to learn what works, learn what didn't work, the pros and cons, the ups and downs, so that, you know, if there's opportunity to go from there, you know, to do your own thing, to you know, start your own group of people that's separate from, you know, whatever, that's up to you on how it is that you want to do it. But I would say try what is being effective when it comes to reassessing policy and looking at, you know, how can we, you know, restore, or how can we, you know, gain ownership back, you know, this, that, and the other. That's something that's governmental, that you know, it requires us to continue to be advocates for those reasons and for ourselves. So, you know, much like we're doing here, we're having discussion, we're bringing up what matters, we're bringing up these different things that we want clarification on. So I would say just, you know, if this is something that is meaningful, and if your background, your where you come from, who you are is tied to, then that is something that's important to bring to your, you know, yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna speak from my personal experience in the last 10 years, is like such bad management and such, I mean, like fatally bad management. People dying because of management, because the management doesn't care, the elevators don't work, the toilets don't flush, there are no refrigerators, there is no hot water, but now we're worried about tearing it down because of earthquake safety. But we've been having, and also there are so many empty apartments, even in the Roslyn. There's so many empty apartments in Los Angeles right now. Like, why are they not being more utilized? And why is nobody having an oversight? HACLA will come into the building and they'll be like, oh, you're fine. You haven't had, you're not getting hot water or whatever. Oh, well, okay, duly noted. And then they don't have any hot water forever. So, like, where does the accountability start taking place? How do we work to the point where like, we can believe in this, because I believe in the whole co-op thing 1,000%, and I think we all want that. But there's, like, let's bring it back. Let's bring back tenant ownership. Or not bring back tenant ownership. Let's have tenant control, tenant management, a tenant committee, so that we can bring the Roslyn back to the jewel in the crown of the SRO that it should be, that we can start fixing all of the SROs, you know, and make them not dangerous, not where there's human trafficking in them. I mean, what? You know what I mean? Who's in charge? Who's in charge of that? So let's go straight to the people who are in charge, and to, if you're not able to handle this, whoever you are, then we can and we will handle it, because we know what we need. We don't want human trafficking in our building. We don't want drugs in our building. We don't want your building with no glass in the window. We had a fatal fire in November that had a 7-hour flood before that fatal fire. And during that fatal fire, no smoke alarms went off. 2 smoke alarms went off in individual rooms. People slept through it. People on the 14th floor above the thing had to be evacuated by other tenants. But yet that's passing inspection by HACLA every year, all the time. So where does the buck stop? You know, how do we start to feel safe and not displaced? It is not cheaper to demolish. We have the housing stock. We have the income stream. Why can't we take care of our own security? We will certainly not let people in the building. We will certainly figure out amongst ourselves, even if we have to do a chrysalis or something, a way to teach ourselves how to do basic plumbing, how to maybe we send people are in charge of electricians that work in the building. Maybe they're in charge of how to work with the fire department, whatever it is. But it's so poorly managed that to talk about the fact that we had it checked out, it doesn't have to be a rebar. But how many earthquakes have we had since 1914, since it's been built? A lot, and thank God, you're right, we've had it, it stood, because brick got took by the main brick. but the idea that within it is such a hornet's nest of mismanagement, abuse, and stigmatization of the clients, the residents, to call this place home is I think is very important. I think it's very important that we remember that the tenants need control.
Thank you.